Shalom Aleichem. Chag Sameach. We are meeting here virtually, as close as to reality as we can manage, because it is more practicable for many reasons. And I'm pleased to be able to meet with you all, see you all, to the extent that some of you have your cameras on and others have them off, and that's also okay. And the discussion can be on any topic, on any matter you prefer. I welcome all of you, and I see now that Yididi Mechubadi Rabbeinu Avi Grossman is with us. Shalom Alecha, Rabbi Avi.
I'm flattered. Thank you.
And who would like to begin?
I'd like to ask how was yes, sir.
Sorry, go ahead. Go on.
How was your Seder?
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. I was semi-expecting the Iranians to deliberately interrupt our Seder, but they did not for whatever reason, and I suppose that's a good thing. But in the long run, doesn't change the overall equation. We still have to deal with our arch enemies. So I see that there's one person here. Naomi Leah Goffman Byrne has a soft matzah bakery logo in San Diego. That's interesting.
Baruch Hashem. Good morning, Harav, and everybody.
Shalom. Would you like, I'm not sure I'm familiar with the name. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Naomi Byrne. I live in Los Angeles. Thank God I've been listening to your Torah, Harav, for several years now. And then I was fortunate enough to find a local community with a very good teaching of Torah with Rabbi Yonatan Halevi in San Diego. I live in Los Angeles, a couple hundred miles away, and glad to be here today.
And could you perhaps tell us a bit more about the soft matzah bakery in San Diego?
Yes. This was my first year participating in it, and so what I can tell you is that about maybe close to 100 people participated, maybe about 60, I'm not sure, and we baked our matzah together a couple of weeks ago, and learned about the hilchot of matzah, and it was a very enriching experience. And I used my own handmade soft matzah at my Seder this year for the first time. So
let me understand.
What else would you like to know?
Let me understand. This is a bakery that produces such matzot for sale, or this is some kind of cooperative effort on the part of different people to bake their own soft matzot?
It is a cooperative effort on the behalf by the community of Rabbi Yonatan Halevi and Rabbi Deborah Halevi of the BT Worldwide Organization based in San Diego, California. And so the members of the community and got together, and we baked our matzah, and we sang and danced and prayed and made a very special day out of it. And so the matzah, sorry, I'm so sorry, but to address your question, the matzah was for the consumption of the community members. None of it was for sale.
I see. Harav Yonatan Halevi that you mentioned, am I correct in guessing or assuming that he is Sfaradi?
Yes, Harav.
Okay, I'm not surprised, because in the Ashkenazi world, for whatever strange reason, it's not only not done, it generally induces some kind of allergic reaction just hearing about the concept of soft matzah.
Indeed. Well, I was okay to learn from you first about that every Jew, baking matzah is a skill that every Jew should have, and that mentality lit up my enthusiasm for my Judaism in a very significant way. Not just that statement, but your whole philosophy and approach that's bodies. And so, as I said, Baruch Hashem, after learning just with you and Rabbi Grossman and the other people associated with Machon Shilo, I was fortunate to find a local community that is also, in my very inexperienced perception, teaching Torah in an authentic way.
So perhaps you could expand a little bit on how exactly these matzot were produced. Where did the flour come from? On how are these matzot baked?
Okay, so apparently there's a flour producer in Los Angeles that sells its total output of shmura flour to some organization in Borough Park. And so Rabbi Halevi, being in California, tried to buy directly from them, but had to actually get the flour that was shipped from California to New York, some of it shipped back to us in California. So that was the source of the flour. And I'm not too privy to all the details, but he identified a flour mill that processed the flour in a way that it was guarded from coming into contact with water and the ways that matter. And then, the Mayim Shalanu was set up in the proper way. And the entire house, the rabbi's house, was sort of transformed into a bakery for the day, where we had a wood-fired oven outside using a comal, which is a Spanish term. I don't know if everyone is familiar with it, but like a flat plate of metal over a wood fire. And so we had a production line for the matzah inside the house where several people kneaded the dough and several people rolled out the dough and several people punctuated the dough. And then the dough was passed through an opening in the windows, essentially, so that the heat of the fire was kept separate from the area where the matzahs were prepared. And it was a sort of an assembly line. And I think we made about 1,000 pieces of matzah that day.
Wow, that's very impressive. And now tell us about the actual final product. How were the matzot?
Well, I'm not going to say that it tasted delicious. It was, the bread of affliction. It was flexible. It allowed, the folding of the matzah for the term is escaping me at the moment.
The korech.
Yes, thank you. And it was looking like a tortilla, very thin though. And,
right.
The Rav's criteria for how we were doing on our matzah production was that it come off the heat cooked thoroughly, so there's no raw dough inside, but that the matzah is still flexible. And then we immediately put them into plastic while they were still hot, like a plastic Ziploc bag, and froze them. And then the instructions from the Rav was to take it out shortly before the Seder, plata.
Yes.
And that's what we.
That's correct. That's what I do. They stay very fresh that way. Well,
may I just
shared? I'm so sorry. Just I'll add one more thing. Hi, Chaim. I shared your videos of baking matzah in your home widely with our friends and our community of people who had questions.
Okay, very good. Chaim, you wish to say something?
No, I just wanted to add in. I'm not sure if the Rav is familiar with Rabbi Yonatan Halevi, but he's actually much more open-minded than the standard Sfaradi Rav. Like for example, he goes to Harabayith, which says a lot about a person. I know he also, the one video that I saw from him was called Jewish Stockholm Syndrome, and he was talking about how it's a big problem that even still today we're identifying with the different galuyot that we came from. I don't know if he would go quite as far as the Rav in terms of different piskei halacha, but he's definitely more open-minded.
And he is the Rav of a community that is defined as Sfaradi?
That much you can ask. I'm not sure.
Yes, that is correct. And he was given smicha by Rav Peretz, and I wish I could remember his first name in Jerusalem, but maybe some other people will know.
All right. Well, that's very interesting. Thank you for that story, that piece of information, Naomi.
Thank
I
you for
can make
sharing it
I
and
can
allowing
I
better.
can make I can make one simple suggestion for improving the flavor of the matzot, and that is to add some salt to the dough. Now, this is a controversial statement in some people's in the mind of some people, but let me explain briefly. I hear myself a bit of an echo, so perhaps someone should switch off the microphone or something like that. I'm going to try and mute a couple of people just in case that's the problem. If anyone wants to speak or something, just sort of wave or shout or do something or wave a red flag, and we'll unmute you. So, in essence, putting some salt in the dough is entirely normal. As Mori Rav Yosef Gaffer writes in his Perush on the Rambam, it is simply abnormal to produce bread of any kind, leavened or unleavened, without salt. Have you ever anyone here tasted bread without salt? It's terrible. It's truly the definition of tasteless. That's the definition of tasteless. Bread without salt. I once knew a person who suffered from some kind of heart condition, and the doctors told him he must not consume salt, so he had to buy the special bread without salt, and he gave me a little piece to try. It was truly unpalatable. Bread by definition requires salt just to be edible, essentially. Now you may say, well, that's all very well, but there's nothing to do with chametz. If it makes things more, if it speeds up the process of himus, of leavening, then that's asur. Well, the answer is it's actually precisely the opposite. Salt, as any baker will tell you, anyone who knows anything about baking will tell you, salt retards the process of chimutz. It slows it down. And I know from personal experience. I bake all year round. I bake sourdough bread. Nowadays, just once a week, Shabbat. But I know that on the odd occasion, very rare occasions, that I forgot to put salt in the dough and walked away. You come back a relatively short time later, an hour or two later, it begins to rise and expand at a tremendous rate in a very uncontrolled fashion. In other words, the process of leavening of himuth, it really is out of control. It's too fast, and that's why also the dough will develop a sour flavor to many people's palates, too sour. What happens when you add some salt to the dough, either at the beginning or near the beginning? It's okay to let it rise for an hour perhaps without salt, let it kick off properly. That's if you're using sourdough, as I do. If you use commercial, what's called baker's yeast, then these matters can change somewhat, but because that kind of yeast always rises no matter what you do. But there too, without salt, it's out of control. If you put salt in the dough, it retards the entire process. In other words, it regulates the process of himus. It happens more slowly and more evenly, and the flavor is not just because it has some salt in it, but the flavor of the dough, because the process of fermentation took place in a more regulated, more less uncontrolled fashion, the bread has a better flavor. And the same is true of Matzah. Now, so where did the idea come that you should not use salt in Matzah? This is mentioned by a few Rishonim from Ashkenaz and Tzorfat in medieval times for the first time. And when you look into this, you see that none of these Rishonim actually knew why there was such a minhag not to use salt. This matter was really investigated thoroughly and explained properly by Professor Yisrael Tashma, Zichrono Livracha, in a book called Minhag Ashkenaz HaKadmon, And he brings all the various Rishonim, etc., who discuss this matter. And they mention there is such a minhag, but none of them know why there is such a minhag. And therefore, they began hunting for reasons why there is a minhag not to use salt. And some of them suggested that perhaps salt increases the rate of himus, and therefore it should not be placed in the Matzah because of the hashash that it will become chametz, because it speeds up the process. It's a catalyst rather than a retarding agent. Now, unfortunately, those Rishonim, b'mehila mikavodam, did not know a lot about baking, apparently. Because, again, anyone who does know something about baking knows that this is simply not true. And it's also a fact that they were suggesting that maybe this is the reason because they didn't have any other reason. But it's not the reason. It's clearly not the reason. It's also explicitly mentioned by the Ritba and others that you may use salt in the dough for the Matzah, and it's clear from the Rambam. If it was so, the Rambam would mention such a thing. It's not so. It doesn't say such a thing in the Rif. It doesn't say such a thing in the Talmud. The most obvious question is, why does it not say, if it's a salt, why does it the Talmud not state you don't place salt in Matzah? Because that's the natural, normal thing to do in any bread dough of any type. So the answer is, as Professor Tashma explains, without going into all the details, is that Chazal Doresh on the pasuk Leil Shimurimhu at the end of Parashat Bo, right? Leil Shimurimhu. This is the night of Pesach. Leil Seder is described as Leil Shimurim, and in the Mechilatha, in Midrash Halakha, it says Leil Hashamur Uva Mina Mezikin, which means, now, however you understand the concept of Mazikim, if you understand it to mean some kind of evil influences or demons or whatever, as some have understood the concept, then that means that you do not have to fear those negative influences or realities or whatever it might be on Leil Seder. Now, what has this got to do with salt? Well, let me tell you. I once heard a soldier relate to me the following story, that he had a fellow soldier in his unit always placed a clove of garlic under his pillow before he went to sleep. And he asked him why do you do this? And he said he was a Sfaradi, he was Moroccan. And the answer he got was, my grandmother's told me to do it, and I don't know why. But I do it because she told me. So he told him, well, why didn't you ask her? So he did ask her. And she said, it's neged ayin hara. It drives away the shedim. It drives away the demons and all sorts of other evil things. It protects you. When you look into these things, in many various cultures, it's not a Jewish idea at all, things with very strong, powerful flavors are considered to, as it were, neutralize these negative things. So garlic is such a thing because it has a very strong flavor. Onions also, according in some versions. Salt has a very powerful, overpowering flavor. We all know if you put too much salt by mistake in any kind of dish, beyond a certain point, it's inedible because the flavor is so strong. Salt was considered one of those things that protects from such things. We also see in nature, in the real world, that is to say, in the created world, if you take a piece of meat, salted meat, it can become salted to such an extent that it is preserved, where you have no refrigeration. Salt beef was one way of preserving meat. Similarly, other substances with very high, very powerful flavors, such as black pepper, for example, were used for the same purpose. In medieval Europe, we know historically that black pepper, which was imported from the East, from India, was extremely expensive. There were times in medieval Europe when black pepper was more expensive per weight than gold. Why was it so expensive? And why was it used? Because it was used to preserve meat and other things that would very quickly spoil without such a substance. So we see that certain substances with very powerful flavors have this characteristic of preventing spoiling, rotting, things going bad. And it was somehow at least associated in the minds of people with having other spiritual powers to defend and protect. So seeing that Leil Seder is Leil Shimurim, as it's described in the Pasuk, and seeing that there is a drasha that talks about it being Shamur Min HaMezikin. Now seeing that that's the case, salt, which is anti-Mezikin as it were, was deliberately left out of the Matzah in a demonstrative fashion to show that we believe this to be a Leil Shimurim, and we are not concerned about any negative influence or power on this night, and we don't need the salt to protect us. This is apparently how this practice grew up, but it has no halakhic standing at all, and it is entirely based on those who claim that it has something to do with himutz are completely mistaken, and it was never the case in very ancient times. It's something that appears, as I say, for the first time in medieval Germany, France, for the reasons that we have described. So, getting back to the taste of the flavor of the matzah, you will discover when you put some salt in the matzah that the final product will be much more palatable, more tasty. Simply in simple terms, but much more tasty. So I wanted to. Rav Green wanted to say something. Hang on a second. Wait a second.
Well,
Chaim?
I had something to add. In the previous years, the only soft matzah I've ever had was the ones that I've made myself, or the first year that I made it with the Rav, and that has always had salt in it. So this year, I was at a Seder, and I brought my own matzot, and there was someone else there that also he had a few different ones that he got from like different places, also had soft matzah, and I tried his, and they were without salt. I mean, I could tell right away because mine was way tastier than anything that he had there. It was quite apparent that the salt was making a big difference.
Right. Okay. Well, there you go. Rav Breen, were you trying to say something?
Sure. You can hear me?
I can, yes.
Sure. So, look, I can't have enough shavach for the Rav on the matzahs. It was just amazing experience, and the amazing kiddush that we brought into it was that look, if the matzahs are been the flowers are been textured, so it's tahor. And I've never had a tahor meal in my life up until Leil Seder, where with a plastic glove I had a first bite of that matzah. So that is Tehon Matar, as you know, the Mila from Rabbi Meir says, one who speaks on a Kodesh, it's Tehon Matar, and one other thing is Bein Olam Haba. So I can take you out to our matzah baking factory. We're looking to do another stud here. It's mostly like the Rav said, except we made our own tanur. Can you see the sets of coals?
I can see these are portable barbecues.
These are essentially just two aluminum tins, which are made in Hutzlards actually, and we have the coals in there. So there's a mandamer that says aluminum doesn't kabel tuma, but if you want to hold machmer, it's a type of metal. That's not a problem. We made our own tanur, which sits on top of this. It is essentially a blech made in Israel, where I bended 7 centimeters down on each side, so that there's essentially 2 legs. I would take it on now, but I'd have to put on gloves to take it out because it's got a din of tahor. And we put it on top so it doesn't touch the heat source, and that is our heat source. And everything else we do, like the Rav said, we got the water from the Machon Shilo by your David. It's been in the fridge for a couple of days now for a couple of batches, and even though it's a little awkward to wrap it in plastic, make sure you don't touch it, and to go to and I take it to the mikveh, and people say you don't need to take this to the mikveh, it's the blech, and I try not to get involved in a long conversation. I'm not taking it for din nachri, I'm taking it for din Erev Shemesh, But besides that, it's the main thing. I'm hoping to find more foods. If I can get live fish that hasn't, and get it live before Shemetu. If I can get eggs that have never been hechshed, I'd like to have some meals with Mutar and invite guests.
It sounds interesting. And how were the matzot that this is the first year that you produce your own?
First year we did soft. First year we did kitnios and soft matzahs. We had salt to one of the batches, but the batches that I made batara, I didn't. I just think I didn't know the whole reason why it would be good to edit. So they tasted like a matzah, but soft, much better than the hard break your teeth on matzahs, and much better for korech. And we didn't stop there. I wrapped some chicken in it and things of that sort during the Seder. So it was very good.
Excellent. Anyone else have some soft matzah experience to relate?
I'm about to make some matzah here with the guys.
Here, okay. Very good.
I don't see how to reverse my camera with it when I'm on Zoom. Here, we'll do it.
There we go. Now we can.
This is our classic matzah bakery. This is our old grill.
Zoom in a bit. Get a bit closer so we can understand what you're showing us.
You see the grill? This is the kitchen, and that's my stove.
Okay.
And that is the grill I've been using for 15 years now.
What is just a piece of metal, steel plate?
Well, it's not stainless steel. It's old cast iron.
Oh, it's even better.
I got it at Naaman I got 14 years ago for my own operation. This is another cast iron skillet that we're using now. Thank God we have more benot mitzvah around the house, so we have a larger staff making the matzah, so we need a second pan. I found the first time after I ate soft matzah that it seems that for many, it was an entirely economical decision, especially with the Industrial Revolution, to just eat cracker matzahs. If you want to have soft matzah, you have to keep it fresh, and you certainly can't have a large operation making matzah many months in advance without a large freezing operation. But if you make cracker matzahs, whether by hand or by machine, then you could go to work at Hanukkah time and easily store your product, and then you could move it right before Passover. So it's a lot more economical, I realized, because the soft matzahs they had in the market there in New York back in Tashin Samech Gimel were pretty awful. I didn't eat soft matzah for another 4 years because of that, because I didn't figure out how to make my own until I came to Rabbi Yaakov and basically put in the effort. And my children, who've had the privilege of making matzah here and also with the Rav, have told me that I'm sorry, but mine tastes better. But they also point out that I don't add salt. I never saw a reason to add salt. They taste so good without it. I'm not against it, but it never worked out that way. So we're not willing to start experimenting and trying this. But I could see why people prefer salted matzahs. It could be mashma from Strites. Strites used to advertise that their matzot were what? Unsalted. And the shaila is, what's the havamina? They would sell salted matzahs, and apparently, yes, at a certain point after the baking process, they'd sprinkle a little salt on the matzahs, just like they do with certain types of crackers, like saltines. So that they found that was better, and some people want to know just matzahs plain, so they advertise it. Strites unsalted matzahs. That's a big deal here.
So please do share with us your manufacturing process. How does it result in a better product than mine? I'm happy to know.
I don't think it's a better product. I'm just saying my children prefer mine.
That's fine. It's very good. I'm glad. The main thing is that people pick up the idea that you can bake matzah at home.
Well, I guess if you stick around for another hour, we could actually see it in practice. But it's pretty simple. The flour is in the fridge there, and so is the water. They're both waiting. And when the time comes, I take my large mixing bowl, which is down here, this stainless steel one, or the much bigger one for a bigger batch, and I mix the flour and the water, entirely by hand, by the way, because I have a good feel for how much water to put in. And one of the children stands here and rolls it out, or my wife rolls it out with the rolling pin, and then quickly throws it onto the grill. And By that point, there's someone else here with the spatula who's flipping the matzahs or taking them off, just like we did in years past. Yeah, and then they come off here. There's usually a pan here or towels waiting to receive them. No, this is not supposed to be here, but usually that's what we do. Very simple.
Perhaps I should relate at this point how I discovered that this is the most practical and simplest way to produce matzah. By the way, of course, you can bake bread in the same fashion on a frying pan, a dry frying pan, a skillet, or what have you, some kind of any kind of skillet or pan that sits on a hot source of real heat below. The way I discovered this was many years ago. I was at the home of Mori Rav Yosef Gafech Zitzal, and one of the things I raised with him during that conversation was about soft matzah, and I told him that I had tried to produce soft matzah, and having mixed the dough, etc., tried to bake it in a regular Western type of oven, and they came out not hard. They came out such that you could literally break your teeth on them, quite literally break your teeth. I was unable to eat even a morsel of it. It was totally inedible, even though they were not burnt. And his wife happened to, and I recall we went up to his kitchen, upstairs to his kitchen, I think to prepare a cup of tea or something for him, and his wife was there, and she heard me discussing this with Rav Gafech, and she began to laugh, and I said, "What's so funny, Rabbanit Bracha Gafech Zitzal?" And I said, well, what's funny? She said, "You're never going to succeed. You're never going to be able to produce soft matzah using such methods." So I said, "All right, so tell me, what am I missing?" She said, "You need a different kind of oven. It's all about how you bake it." She said this to me, and that was it. That opened my eyes to thinking about other ways of baking bread or matzah. Doesn't matter. You can take a leavened dough for a pita, shall we say, and put it on a hot skillet also, on the stove or whatever, and it will bake beautifully. In other words, there's more than one way to skin a cat or to bake matzah, as Chazal point out explicitly in the Tosefta, that you can bake matzah over literally placing the dough over hot embers that have died down a bit from when they're red hot. The hot embers, you place the dough directly on the hot embers. That's called Matzah Haroim, the way the shepherds would prepare bread in the field. Or and Rambam brings this, or you can do it over an ilafas. That's a kind of frying pan or skillet. And that's when it occurred to me that we'll try doing it and I looked more into I learned more about baking bread at that time. This is going back, I suppose, about 40 years, and I understood that there are two kinds of bread in the world in general. This has nothing to do with matzah. There are two kinds of bread. There's the large European loaf type of bread, and there's flatbread. The large European loaf of bread, which is a round or square, whatever shape it is thick, and that has to sit inside an oven at a certain temperature for a long time to bake through. And that's the kind of European bread with which we are all familiar. But there's also another kind of bread in the world, which is flatbread. And all flatbreads are baked not in that fashion, but on a hot surface. They have to be placed on a very hot surface. And this is true for pitot, or what's called esh tanur or lafot, or whatever you want to call them. The very best example of this, I'm not sure if it still exists. You could once observe in the shuk in Yerushalayim, in Mahane Yehuda, there was a bakery called Habba on Rehov Agrippas. I'm not quite sure if that branch of that bakery is still open. But they used to have an old style oven, or where I think there was coals or wood at the bottom. Anyway, the whole large, it was like a kind of very large barrel made of wood, obviously, but it was sort of like a barrel shape. The baker would place his hand with the dough. That was not baking matzot; they were baking lafoth, and would stick it on the side, on the wall of the oven inside, and within 2 minutes it came off that wall. It was removed and brought out. And these are very special. These were well known throughout Yerushalayim and the environs. Their lafoth were very special. So it's baked by sitting on a very hot surface. And this is exactly, by the way, how this is what's called Ridiat Hapath by Chazal. What's Lirdot et Hapath? That is to scrape off, to remove the hot bread from the wall of the oven on which it is baked. When it's stuck onto the wall, and because it's still a bit moist and doughy, it sticks to the wall, and it bakes with the heat of the wall and also the surrounding air. And then you have to remove it quickly from that wall, but otherwise it will burn. And that's called Ridiyat HaPath. And that's when you have the question of the Talmud, the Masechet Shabbat, whether Ridiyat HaPath is a melacha or just a mahashava, with a talent, but it's not a melacha. So actually, when you take raw dough, you place it on the wall or a hot surface, a wall or a surface of an oven or a frying pan, a skillet, that is part of the malacha of baking bread. And that's a sur on Shabbat. But the removing it from the heat source, that is not an actual malacha. And anyhow, that's, for those who want to know, the anecdotal story behind my discovery of how flat bread and matzah are to be produced. That's how it came about.
Isn't Hazal's type of oven like a bit of a combination between, just because it's not just a dry surface, it's a dry surface, but it's also within this clay chamber, which is heating it from all sides?
That's true. That's absolutely true. That was a standard type of oven, but that's not to say that is the only type of that is not the only acceptable way of producing matzah. That's the ideal way, because that kind of oven is extremely hot, and it bakes quickly and evenly, and it's better than a skillet. I don't deny that, but I haven't got the facility to produce or to I don't have the use of such an oven. I can try and show you what Rambam writes here. Just one moment about baking matzah.
Has the Rav tried covering the pan with a pot cover?
I have tried it. It doesn't make a huge, in my experience, it does not make a huge difference. Maybe a very minor difference. Okay, so I'm going to share now with you what Rambam writes in Hilchot Hametz U'Masah Perek Shishi. I will now share the screen with you. Rambam here writes, Halakha Zayin or Halakha Waw, Ehad Matzah shene'afath b'tanur. Matzah, kosher matzah for Pesach, can be produced in an oven, which is what you just described, Chaim. That was a standard kind of oven. It was a kind of sort of a pyramid, not exactly pyramid, but a conical shape, really, made of heres, usually thick heres, thick walls. There was an opening at the bottom in which you placed, at the bottom that you introduced the wood or the coals, the pehamim, which you would light and allow to burn for some time until the entire oven was really very hot. And on the top it had a hole, and you could place an opening, and you could place the pita or the matzah through that hole and stick it on the side of the wall of the oven from the inside. And on top of that opening, you could also place some kind of a grate or something on which you could place a pot to cook or to bake. That was the classic tanur in the time of Chazal, and probably the time of the Tanakh also. So ehad matzah shene'afat b'tanur, matzah that is baked in an oven, or be'ilfas. Ilfas is exactly what we described, a skillet, basically. Ben shehidbika basek be'ilfas v'halkach yitiach, whether you're allowed to even take the matzah, place it on the ilfas, on the skillet, and then place it on top of the heat source. Ben shehitiach v'halkach yidbik, or you can do the other way around. In other words, you don't have to be concerned that if you put it on this skillet, even though the skillet is not yet hot, that's going to become hametz so quickly that you're going to have any problem. You're not going to run into a problem because it's not going to take very long for that skillet to become rather hot. Keep in mind also that from 60 degrees centigrade and above, any process of himuth is shut down chemically. It cannot continue above that temperature. Afilu afaya bakarka. Here, Rambam speaks about the simplest, most primitive way of baking bread, or matzah, which is literally in the ground. What does that mean, in the ground? Bakarka. You would dig a small depression in the ground. Go outside anywhere you like, dig a small depression, let's say circular, in the ground. You will place wood there, burn the wood, and when the flames have died down and the embers have cooled off a little bit, you have these hot coals and embers sitting in that small pit or depression that you created, and you place the dough directly onto directly. It doesn't have to be a grate. Even with a grate, it might be even better. It depends on what you have available, but you can place your matzah or your bread directly on top of that, and you will get a pita or a piece of matzah. That is what's called matzah haroim or path haroim. That is how people out in the field and bashetah would produce bread for themselves. Hareze yosei de'havato. All of this is kasher. So you see that you only have to be. Some people might say, well, how do you know it gets baked properly? Who's to say it's properly baked? Well, the definition is very simple. Rambam writes, even if it's somewhat underbaked, when you take the piece of matzah, the same is true for bread, you break it, you open it up, you pull it apart. If it is so underbaked, essentially not baked at all, to the extent that you will see strings of raw dough appearing before your eyes as you pull it break it into two pieces, that's not baked, and that's not good. That's not considered bread, and perhaps it could even still mahmitz theoretically, but only theoretically, but maybe. But as long as, even if it's not properly baked throughout, as long as when you open it up, you don't have these strings of raw dough appear, that's considered baked sufficiently to be a piece of matzah that you can use at the Seder. That's the halakha, really, really straightforward. So perhaps we'll move on to another topic. Anyone else?
Can I just ask one more question about one of the Rambam?
Sure.
The Rambam said that you can use an ilfas even if you first attach the bread and then heat up the ilfas.
Correct.
Wouldn't that, because I thought what I generally do, I first preheat the frying pan, because if you're bringing it up to the correct heat slowly, wouldn't that perhaps cause chametz to be made?
Well, obviously, it's precisely for this reason that Rambam wrote this, to tell you, and this is based on the sugya on the Talmud, to tell you precisely this, that there is no room to be hoshesh, to be concerned that it could be mahmitz in that situation, in that length of time. It's simply not something real. It's not. It's divorced from reality to imagine such a thing, and it's okay to do that. So if you have a skillet and you place.
What happened?
Hello?
You don't want him to see you?
Okay, so even if you take a skillet, shall we say, and you or some kind of a pan or whatever it is, a baking pan, and you place it over this source of heat with the matzah, shall we say, stuck onto it, it will very quickly achieve a temperature well above 60 degrees. It will be at 100 degrees in almost no time, and it will get hotter than that. Over a gas stove, I think such a skillet would achieve a temperature of 200 degrees easily. It's not it's not a problem. B'kitzur, it's not a problem.
Right. No, it's also it's a bit surprising, especially considering like with Matzah, like we're using Mayim Shalanu, which, you know, as the Rav has explained in the past, it's so that it should be cold. Like we try to keep everything as cold as possible and not have anything that's going to even increase the chances of chametz. So like that's why it's a bit surprising that would be allowed.
Keep in mind that once upon a time, people actually were apparently not in panic mode when producing the matzot. And this is not my claim. This is the Baal HaTanya writes this. If you look up his Hilchot Pesach, which appear in Kuntres Aharon, in the Shulchan Aruch of the Rashas, the Baal HaTanya, he there describes how people use mixed too little water into the dough. And he writes, and the people are also panicked and in a tremendous rush to do everything very quickly. And then you don't knead properly. When you do knead properly, it takes a bit of time to knead a dough properly, let's say 10 minutes. And during that time, we want it to be as cool as possible. But the fact is the concept of Mayim Shalanu does not negate the fact that the Mishnah states explicitly that if you have a dough that was already mixed, flour and water that was mixed, and set aside, and no one looked at it for some time, no one's touched it for some time, at what point must you begin to be concerned that it may have begun to ferment? After how long? What people usually think the Talmud states is the time that it takes to walk one meal. In actual fact, as I've explained previously in various shiurim, that is actually not true. First of all, in the Talmud Yerushalmi, it writes explicitly 4 meal. How long does it take to walk a meal? We'll discuss in a moment. The Yerushalmi states explicitly 4 meal, and in fact, that is the correct reading in the Bavli as well, because the Sugya in the Bavli speaks about the time it takes to walk from Migdal Nunaya to Tiberia, which we know where Migdal Nunaya was and is. Today it's called Migdal, not surprisingly, and we also know exactly where the Byzantine wall at the time of the Talmud of Tiberia stood. The remains of that wall exist to this day. You can measure the distance. And the correct version of the Talmud states the time it takes to walk from that point to this point. All right, so what is the distance? It's 6 kilometers. 6 kilometers divided into 4 is 1.5 kilometers times 4. And that just happens to be a Roman mile times 4. In other words, at least in this context, but I claim in many, many contexts, the meal discussed by Chazal was a Roman mile. We have milestones, literally, avnei mil. We have milestones throughout the Roman Empire, including in Eretz Yisrael in a number of places. In fact, there's a place like that, exactly 1.5 kilometers walk from my home in Gush Etzion. And I've been there, and you can measure the distance between the avnei mil, the remains of these upstanding obelisks of stone, which were the Roman army's way of marking out the distances on a road where their soldiers would have to march. The distance from one stone to the next is 1,470 meters, just under 1.5 kilometers. And times 4, that's just under 6 kilometers. And that's exactly the distance from Migdal or Migdal Nunaya to Tiberia, ancient Tiberia. And that's exactly what the Yerushalmi says. And how long does it take to walk 1.5 kilometers? An average person, I think, would take them approximately 15 minutes. 15 minutes times 4 is an hour. So you're talking about a dough sitting around for 1 hour, not 18 minutes. That's a fiction in actual fact. At 1 hour is a reasonable time. Even that's much faster than most doughs would begin to ferment, but as a natural process, without brewer's yeast, without commercial yeast that most people use today. But it's very quick. That's a very rapid process. That's why it was invented, because it allows you to produce bread in a couple of hours rather than 8 hours or 6 hours. naturally fermented bread, like sourdough bread, after an hour, you won't see anything. You'll see no difference at all. Certainly not less than an hour. So the hashash that's sitting on this skillet for a few minutes heating up is going to be a problem. Is just not a real world concern. That's all I will say on the matter. All right. What else? There must be some other topic that someone else may want to raise or say something. Yes. Let me see if I can unmute. Let's see. Can I?
Nathaniel, hi.
Shalom, Nathaniel. How are you? Where are you from?
Right now, I'm in Colombia. Actually, I'm trying to help the community over here, and I really wanted to. Matzah is so expensive, especially over here to get it. I brought some, but I really wanted to do this with them, the soft matzah, but I don't know. I was just afraid, I guess, to do it myself the first time. Even though I watched the videos and everything, I wanted to do it with somebody else for the first time. I decided. What about though? But also, I was worried about getting flour. You should have flour that's shmur mishas ksira, right?
That's an interesting topic and a separate topic, but let's say, for argument's sake, yes.
Okay, so then, but now I have another question. It's a different topic. I'm scheduled to come to Eretz Yisrael in the beginning of June, but I thought, what is the status right now of making the Korban Pesach? I wanted to maybe be able to do Pesach Sheni if people are doing it. I don't know. I know people were mentioning.
No, it's not possible for all manner of reasons. That's not possible. Not that it's halachically impossible, because halachically, in other words, the problem is not the Torah, not the halakha. The problem is the government, or our enemies, if you like. That is what is preventing us from doing a Korban Pesach. If someone could mute their microphone, someone's microphone seems to be on. I don't know. I'm not sure whose it is. It's not where you are, Nathaniel, correct?
It might be. Maybe I'll walk outside. Oh, it's okay. It's better now.
Okay. So, in a situation where all or most of Am Yisrael are Tamei Meth, and they're not able to become tahor before Pesach. In that situation, all of Am Yisrael performs the Korban Pesach on Yudaret Nisan. No one does it on Yudaret Be'iyar. Yudaret Be'iyar is only for individuals who were when most of Am Yisrael was tahor. But when all of Am Yisrael is tameh, or most of them are tameh, rubam, then you all do it on Nisan, during the month of Nisan. Okay, that's number one. Number two, if you really want to broach this subject with someone who might be able to theoretically help you out, I suggest you write to Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, PO Box, whatever it is, in Jerusalem, and ask him if he's willing to help you out in this matter, because
but
it's purely a matter of politics.
And even if most Am Yisrael is Tamei, then they could do it on.
No, not true. It's only when all of Am Yisrael or most of Am Yisrael are Tameim, it should be done on. It's supposed to be done in Nisan. It's not done in Iyar. It's only for individuals who happen not to be able to do it with the rest of Am Yisrael in Nisan, who do it in the month of Iyar. All right.
So Derek Rechalka won't let you do it in Iyar.
No. That would only apply if everyone else did it in Nisan and you were somehow stuck on the North Pole and you couldn't make it. Then you would be able to do it. Yeah, that's Pesach Sheni, but not as things stand. Anyhow, as I say, it's not a practical discussion, because the authorities will not allow it for all kinds of reasons. I should point out, Nathaniel, that the noise in your background and wherever you are is disturbing us. So I'm going to mute your mic. All right?
Okay.
Very well. Shalom, Rav Shammai. I see you joined us. What? I can't hear you. Just a second. Just a moment. Now we should be able to hear you. What do you have to say on the subject?
Shalom Rav, how are you?
Shalom Aleichem.
Well, it's an unfortunate situation. I think that the fact that we're talking about it is at least a step in the right direction. But indeed, this let's say practical considerations is really what's stopping us at this point. I remember in the past we discussed the communication between Maran Chatam Sofer and his Choten Rabbi Akiva Eger on the subject of
Yes.
revamping the Avodah
Yes.
in the Mikdash. This is almost 200 years ago. They had this conversation, and they worked out in tremendous detail. Primarily the Chatam Sofer and his Shuvot on Yoredea worked out in tremendous detail all the technicalities. How there's no issue of the Kohanim, there's no issue of the Makom HaMizbeach. All these issues could be worked out, and indeed, I think that it's common perception that it's Halakhic technicalities that are preventing us from doing this. But I don't think anything could be farther from the truth. Would the Rav agree?
There is no Halakhic impediment. It is entirely a question of politics and national will. If we had a truly Jewish country, a Jewish government that wanted to make it possible, it would be possible. And halachically would become, therefore, obligatory. No question. And anyone who says otherwise, I'm sorry to say, is either misguided and therefore misleading others, or apparently does not know the true halachic parameters, or they have some other agenda, which what I mean by agenda is, for example, if a Jew, it doesn't matter how he describes himself, he may be learned or less so, and he has an agenda which is that no korban and no mikdash and nothing of that sort can be contemplated until the Mashiach arrives on a white donkey. It falls out of heaven one morning and lands a soft landing on Har HaBayit, and then that morning at 6 a.m. on Israeli news we hear that the Mashiach has arrived. Only at that time is it possible to contemplate a korban. If a person thinks that, well, I'm sorry, they're really ill-informed, misinformed, and in fact ignorant of many basic halachic and Torah concepts. And as you mentioned correctly, Rav Shammai, two of the greatest Aharonim, and was actually, I think, it was more than 200 years ago, more like 220 years ago. The Chatam Sofer and Rabbi Akiva Eger discussed this. The Chatam Sofer's teshuvah is before us, black and white. It's straightforward, and he says if the Sultan, in other words, the Ottoman ruler of the time, were to give permission, then we would be obligated to perform the Korban Pesach. And he addresses the questions that various people raised, namely, what about, do we need techelet for the birdei kahuna on the vestments of the Kohanim? He says, no, it's not ma'akev. This doesn't prevent us from performing this mitzvah. Do we need Kohanim yuhasim? He says, no, we don't. It's not an absolute requirement. Preferable, yes, but not an absolute requirement. Do we need a sis? We don't need the sis either. You don't need a Kohen Gadol, in other words. And you don't even need, all you need really is to build a mizbeach, preferably in the right spot, which is also not too difficult to do. To build a mizbeach is something you probably would take 2 days to do, I imagine, and that's it. So it's entirely about where we as a people are at, in our minds, first of all. Second of all, in practical terms. But we're not even, most people aren't there even psychologically. They're just somehow living in some kind of virtual reality where this doesn't exist, but it's not true. And those who say that the Mashiach has to come before the Beit Mikdash should open up Talmud Yerushalmi, Masechet Ma'aser Sheni, where they will find that it states explicitly, Zoth Omereth, שבית המקדש ייבנה לפני מלכות בית דוד. The mikdash will be operative before Malchut Beth David. So how much more explicit could it be? But as I've said to many people before, I mean, see my tzitzit here, you can see the techelet here, correct? There's white and there's techelet. Now, a person might say, you can see the techelet here. A person might say, with regards to a korban and mizbeach, and there are questions of if you do it incorrectly or you do there are all kinds of hashashot. It might be pasul. You could even come up with the concept that it's some karet involved, this which is not true. But you could begin to obsess over different things. But what can you possibly obsess about when it comes to tzitzit with a simple string of techelet there? What is complicated about that? Nothing. And what can go wrong, even if you say it's not really techelet? Let's just say you're not sure. It might be techelet, it might not be, or you're certain that it's not. Okay, and yet you have it on your tzitzit. What's going to happen to your tzitzit? Is it going to be your tzitzit going to be pasul? No. Is it you going to doing an isur? No. You just didn't have techelet. That's the worst thing that could happen. And yet, many Jews will not put techelet on the tzitzit. Why not? Because they're just not used to it. Because they're used to Yahadut or Yiddishkeit being of a certain type, a certain format. This is how things are done. This is what we do. Anything beyond that, we don't know about. And that's it. It's not part of Torah Judaism as far as they're concerned. But that's not true. That this is the great.
There's this theme.
Exception.
There's a powerful theme that I've been thinking of recently in the last couple of days, which is coming up as the Rav is speaking. There's a theme that comes up specifically on Chag HaMatzot, which is also very powerfully connected to the theme of Geula in general, and that's the idea of timahon. I was speaking with a student of mine from Yeshivat HaKotel who now makes videos for Rav David Foreman's Aleph Beta, the Machon to teach Tanakh. Maybe some of the people here are familiar with it. And we were going on a long conversation about the very, very powerful parallels between the story of Lot being saved from Sodom and the Jewish people being saved from Mitzrayim. I should send you this PDF. I should send the Rav the PDF afterwards because he laid it out very, very well. But just a few powerful connections that stood out for me. First of all, how the story starts off, that Hashem takes note of the situation of Sodom because there's a tza'aka coming up from Sodom, and God goes down to see. He goes down to see. Haketza'akata asu kala. He wants to see the nature of this cry. And similarly in Yetziat Mitzrayim, the first trigger of the Yetziat Mitzrayim process is triggered by the tza'aka of the Jewish people. But one of the things that was pointed out is that as the people are leaving, meaning both subjects in both stories, in the story of Lot and in the story of the Jewish people, there's this phenomenon of timahon, right? Li'itma'amea. It says that Lot and his family, they're very hesitant to leave. Vayitma'ama. They're hesitant. They don't want to go. Vayachziku ha'anashim biyado. And these three men, or these two men rather, they have to grab them and take them out, pull them out of the city because they're being mitma'amea. And as is well known, the Jewish people also in Mitzrayim, they also experience this anti-mitma'amea phenomenon. Ki lo chametz, their bread wasn't able to become chametz. Ki gorshu miMitzrayim v'lo yachlu li'itma'amea. They weren't able to delay. They had to go very, very quickly. The Egyptians were pushing them out in the same manner that these two angelic men in Sodom were pulling them out by force and preventing them to be mitmahamea. So similarly, the Jewish people had the same experience. And this idea of mitmahamea, it's connecting with me strongly now, especially in light of the situation the Jewish people are experiencing now globally, and also more strongly in Eretz Yisrael specifically. What does the word mitmahamea mean? So people will translate, give an appropriate translation of to dilly-dally or to delay, something connoting delaying. But it's a specific type of delaying. Timahon has the connotation of being in shock. Right? We see this already very early in the Tanakh, right? The tehon. The tehon is something, you look at it and you're in shock. You're rendered into a state of paralysis. Lihitma'ameh means to delay out of being in a state of paralysis. You're shocked. You can't move. So you need to be pushed to put one foot in front of the other. And it's not a coincidence that this word comes up in probably the most famous pasuk that deals with the topic of redemption in Sefer Habakkuk, where God says to Habakkuk, after he's seeing the current situation, there it was talking about a specific situation involving the Bavlim and how they were subjugating the Jewish people and how things were really not good. And God says to the Navi, Imit ma'amea chakelo. If you have this experience that things are being delayed and nothing is progressing, nothing's moving forward, be patient. Things are going to progress in their right time. Things are going to progress. You have to just keep on putting one foot in front of the other, so to speak. That statement, Imit ma'amea chakelo, is itself a response to what Habakkuk says in the opening verses of Sefer Habakkuk. Ru'u bagoyim v'hibitu v'tamo tamo. He says, I'm looking at the state of affairs and I'm in a state of shock. V'tamo. I'm in a state of timon, tema. And this idea of this entropic force, this force that wants to keep things still, wants to keep things from moving, breaking things down, not able to move. Right? There's this force that needs to be fought against in all these stories of redemption.
Shammai, I'm just sharing the screen. I'm just sharing with the text that you referred to, so people can see the pasuk here. Here it is in front of you.
Yeah, I believe it's pasuk hey, right? Yeah,
right.
Yeah, pasuk
hey. Yes, go on, please.
Yeah, and how it's not a surprise that the Rambam in Shmona Prakim, in Akdamat Chelek, in Akdamat Perek Chelek, his introduction to the final chapter of Masechet Sanhedrin, where he lists famously his 13 principles of faith, or his 13 foundations of faith, and he paraphrases this pasuk. He says, it is a principle to believe in the coming of Mashiach and to believe that the redemption will come. And if things feel that there's this timahon force, there's this entropic force that's keeping from any progress, that's keeping things from moving, then you should stay the course. Stay the course. Don't stop. And it's this idea that also in the very foundational Geula experience of the Jewish people, there was this timahon, there was this potentiality for timahon, and the Jews were pushed out. Like they were just pushed out. They weren't able to stay put, even if that was perhaps their preference for some people. And I think just the general trend that we've been perhaps feeling for a very long time, and certainly right now, of that there's the chaos, the chaotic forces that are keeping us from making any progress. The response to this that we learn from Yetziat Mitzrayim is to put one foot in front of the other. That is the nature of this, right? The nature of this challenge is not to fall victim to the timahon, to not fall victim to this state of shock that renders us into paralysis. And I think that when the Rav talks about these halakhic acrobatics that are essentially excuses for why we don't make progress in certain areas, it's a symptom of this paralysis. It's a psychological and perhaps emotional even construct that we create for ourselves, reasons why we don't want to move forward, or we shouldn't move forward. And it's a product of this. It's a product of this timahon, the shock that renders you into being paralyzed.
Paralysis or indecision.
Yes, indecision. Correct.
Inability
timahon,
to take a decision.
Yeah. The itma'ameh means you're delaying because you're in shock. You're delaying because you're paralyzed.
And eventually,
which is not a good place to be.
Yeah. Eventually, what happens when such a situation exists and continues to exist over a long period of time, and it becomes increasingly difficult to explain away your paralysis, eventually that paralysis or that inaction, that indecision, becomes an ideology in itself, and you have to justify it. You have to explain why it's not only that I'm not sure that I can put Cheret on my tzitzit, I'm sure that I cannot. And not only
Right,
am
it's asur.
I'm not
Asur to do it.
certain that I'm not certain that we can make a Korban Pesach. You somehow come up with all the reasons in the world why it's definitely asur and impossible to do a Korban Pesach, even though it's opposite of all the explicit sources on the subject. But it becomes an ideology to which you are then bound, and it helps to explain. It helps to explain your action or lack thereof. Another example I will give you to illustrate this point. We all know that in Chutz La'aretz, to sleep in a sukkah in most places is not practical. First and foremost, because of the weather. Either it's cold, or it's rainy, or it's both. There might be other reasons, security reasons, and what have you, which also unfortunately exist in Eretz Yisrael as well in certain places. But first and foremost, the weather. Whereas in Eretz Yisrael, in most parts of the country, most years, it's possible to sleep in a sukkah in terms of the weather. Now, all Jews in Chutz La'aretz knew, all the Jews were always learning the Mishnah, the Talmud, and the Halakha, that one must sleep in a sukkah. But most Jews in most countries also knew that the weather does not permit this. And they got used to the fact, and they were able to deal with the fact that, well, we just don't sleep in a sukkah because we can't. We're anusim. We are prevented from doing so. Okay, that's legitimate. That's true. Again, it depends on where you live, but in many places that's the case. But then we find an interesting development, which I roundly decry and deplore and critique, namely that which you find in Lubavitch, Chabad circles. The Tzemach Tzedek, I think was the Tzemach Tzedek, if I'm not mistaken, one of the rabbis of Chabad way back, came up with the idea, yesh me'ayin, from nowhere, that sleeping in a sukkah is not only not possible because of the weather in White Russia, where Lubavitch comes from, where it's certainly cold and not practical to sleep in a sukkah, but it's actually asur to sleep in a sukkah. For some convoluted Kabbalistic reason, so the claim is, which no Mekubal had ever heard of before, the Tzemach Tzedek. The Ari doesn't know about it, the Zohar doesn't know about it, no one's ever heard of such a concept, but the Tzemach Tzedek came up with a Kabbalistic reason why it is incorrect and improper to sleep in a sukkah, which of course means also that such people, followers of that system, who live in Eretz Yisrael, for example, today, even if the weather is entirely clement, and it's quite possible to sleep in the sukkah, will not sleep in the sukkah because of this completely spurious claim that it is not proper to do so. But the truth is that the Tzemach Tzedek, psychologically, this is how I read it, was unable to deal with the fact that there is a chavah to sleep in a sukkah, and we just do not do this. We don't do it year after year after year. We just don't do it. How is that possible? He couldn't handle this prospect. How do you digest such a situation? His response, which again one cannot possibly accept, is that really, according to the Torah, or at least according to his mystical teachings that he came up with, it's not proper to sleep in a sukkah, and then you solve the problem. Because now you don't have to sleep in a sukkah. You don't have to feel that you're not performing the mitzvah of sukkah properly, because in fact you are. In fact, you're doing a better thing. You're performing the mitzvah more correctly than those who do sleep in a sukkah if they happen to live in some more pleasant, more temperate climate, because they're actually doing something incorrect by sleeping in a sukkah. This is all psychology. It's galut-based psychology and habit, which then become law or invented law, but it's not Torah, and it actually undermines the Torah.
Machon.
All right.
I feel that we're dealing with a lot of collective trauma at a national level that we're trying to deal with. People are they attempt to deal with this in the best way possible. As the Rav said, year after year, you see that you're not able to fulfill the mitzvot. You're not able to connect to the Torah in the way that you're supposed to. And it forces you to adopt certain positions and ideologies just in order to feel at peace with the situation. That's what I take away when I see things like this.
I recently viewed a half hour video on YouTube where two secular leftists from this pernicious organization known as Ahim Laneshek are filmed in a meeting. It's 30 minutes long, as I recall, with Harav Tzvi Friedman. I'm not sure where he lives, but I suspect he lives in Bnei Brak. And I'm even willing to say that I had not heard this Talmid Chachamim's name before. He's an elderly gentleman, to be sure, judging by the video. Apparently a Talmid of Rav Shach and others. And he's very sincere, and they come to him, of course, wanting to know how can we reach some kind of understanding so that Charedim will go to the army. So he presents his position, which didn't surprise me at all. In fact, it confirmed and reiterated that which I recently said to someone when we discussed this. Why Haredim do not wish to and will not join the army. And I explained in basic terms that it has to do first and foremost with the concern that the young men who go to the army will walk in with the kippah and walk out without a kippah, basically. That's very simplistic and doesn't do the subject justice, but that's the first and essential concern. And
this was the video where the Rav in question called the army the Kor Hituch.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, that's correct.
Kor Hituch in English for the English listeners. I apologize.
The Kor Hituch is
right. The crucible. The crucible for secular society.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And there is truth to that statement. I do not deny much of what Rav Friedman Shlita said. I did not disagree with much of what he said. When you understand that is the real discussion. It's not it has nothing to do with what the Rambam says at the end of Ilchot Shemitah Yovel about Shevet Levi. That's not a real proof of anything. And one can find explicit statements in Rabbeinu Hananel says Mefurash that Talmidei Chachamim hayav to mitgayes b'milchemet mitzvah. There are all kinds of sources. It's not a question of sources. The sources are clear.
Where does Rabbeinu Hananel write this? Just out of curiosity, I've never heard of this source.
I'll quote it to you in a moment.
Okay.
But what did I want to say? Hang on a second. Let me just begin to look it up as I speak to you.
You're saying how, in principle, the Rav agrees with the assessment of this Rav Friedman about the situation in the army.
Yes, I do. In other words, I understood all along, as I expressed to my interlocutor when I was discussing this with someone not long ago, and this person did not want to accept what I was saying, that this is the Haredi, the real fundamental Haredi reasoning behind their behavior. And this person said, no, that can't be true. It's all about, they want to be parasites and live off others and all sorts of things of this nature. And I said, that's not really what it's all about. It's all really about something else altogether. So this Rav Friedman confirmed all the things I had said. But then at some point, he also said, he mentioned something else. And he said, the Jewish people are not a nation. We're not another nation. He says, we are an aguda datit. Those were his words, not mine. An aguda, right. a religious association, or some kind of community. We're a religious community. We're not
a religious community.
Now that is clearly not true. I mean, you don't have to go very far in the Torah to understand that is mistaken. You look in Sefer Shemot and it says Am B'nai Israel, right? It says Am B'nai Israel. The Jewish people are a nation. The Jewish people are not just a nation; they're a nation with a special purpose and destiny, etc. They're a nation that, like other nations, have to go to war occasionally. That's why the Torah says, "Ki tesela milchama alo yevecha." Religious communities don't go to war; nations go to war, right? You wouldn't have a halacha in Masechet Eruvin, which is in the Shulchan Aruch, that if goyim threaten even just to steal, let's say, agricultural equipment or produce on Shabbat, that if it's on Be'ezor Sfar, if it's on the border region between where the Jews reside and settle and where the goyim live, then you go out on Shabbat and prevent them doing so by whatever means necessary, including all manner of Hilul Shabbat. In other words, that's a halakha psuka in the Shulchan Aruch. What has that got to do with? That's because of why? The Talmud states, because of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. How is Yishuv Eretz Yisrael a religious community concept? You can be a religious community in Uganda if you want to take up Herzl's suggestion, or the British suggestion that Herzl was willing to settle for, or you can be a religious community in Lithuania, as we know, or in Hungary, or in New Zealand, or in Denmark, wherever it might be. You can be a religious community, just like you can have a Christian community in any of these countries, or a Muslim community in any of these countries. But the Jewish people are not just a community; they are a nation with a land, with a history, with a heritage that is the land. The land is an essential part of that heritage and history, and part of our purpose and function, our modality of being in this world. To say that we are not an am, and therefore we have nothing to do with giyus and nothing to do with an army, we are an agudah datit, that is a complete distortion of the Torah. What brought a Talmid Chachamim like Rav Friedman to make such a distortion? Because he's signed up for this ideology, which, again, I can completely understand when it comes to not wanting to have anything to do with the secular world, because it's going to destroy our people. And there's much truth to that. But he goes the extra mile. He adds this further mistaken and misleading claim that we are not an Am Bichlal. And that's a perversion. That's a complete perversion. In answer to your question, I will tell you that we have the Mishnah Masechet Sotah Daf Mem Daled, which states that B'milchemet Miswa Hakol Yoseim Afilu Hatham Mihadro B'chala Michupatha, correct, as everyone knows, and the Aruch. If you look up in Masechet Sotah, Daf Yod, Amud Aleph, you will see that on the side of the page it brings something from the Aruch. It says, "V'chol sheken tamidei chachamim." In other words, when it's the Mishnah talks about hatam mihadro, even a bridegroom and a kala mihupatha, and the bride, even if they're needed for the war effort, each in their own way. Obviously, women don't fight in a war as men do, but they're needed for as part of the overall national military effort. They are to leave whatever they're doing, their wedding celebration, and go off and join the war effort. The Aruch says, "V'chol sheken tamidei chachamim," okay, and the Rabbeinu Hananel quotes this. And if you look up the Keren Orah, the famous Perush Aharon on Daf Mem Daled in Sotah, the Keren Orah writes. And this is the Keren Orah that all the Charedim learn, right?
Yeah, of course.
So writes the Keren Orah. All right?
Right.
And
the Keren Orah was a Talmud of Rav Chaim of Brisk, if I'm not mistaken.
No. That's not the case. I don't remember. He was in Germany. He was in Ashkenaz in Germany. He wasn't. I don't think he was a Talmud Rav Chaim Brisk. I don't believe so. But maybe I'm.
Oh no. He was excuse me, Rav Chaim Balozhin, not Rav Chaim Brisk.
Yes, I think that might be true. Yes. So the Keren Orah, the Aharon that the Haredim love to love and to learn, writes explicitly, "Afilu tamidei chachamim tzrichim libatem limudam." This is Daf Mem Daled in Sotah. All right. The Aruch says, "B'chol sheken tamidei chachamim," and in the Yerushalmi over there, by the way, it says, "Leth Rabbi berabi." What does that mean? Leth Rabbi berabi. When it comes to Milchemet Miswa, the Pnei Moshe writes, "Afilu Rabban ben Rabban yesek." Even the son of the Rosh Yeshiva of Am Yisrael, the head of the Sanhedrin of Am Yisrael, is meguyas, goes off to war. In other words, in terms of the true halachic parameters of the discussion, there is no discussion. All the claims are excuses. But there is a real reason, and it's not an egotistical reason. It's a very real reason. They believe, and they are not completely wrong, that if we rub shoulders with that secular world, then there will be nothing left. In his words, he said, "Lo yishel klum." There will be nothing left from what they understand to be real Torah, real Yiddishkeit.
And it should be said explicitly. Our community, the people who aspire to be loyal to a Torah way of life, and at the same time to fulfill our national obligations. The Hesder system that was set up by us was primarily for this reason. It wasn't out of convenience, or people can be in the army with their friends. It was to create an experience in which the army can be done within some form of a community of people that went through yeshiva together, and that was the primary consideration. Right? If you talk to mechanchim in this world, they'll be very honest with you. They'll be very open with you. It's a tremendous risk for someone, even for someone who went through 12 years of education and had all the ideology given to him, so to speak, to go into that world and to be off the reservation, right? It's a risk, and to right in order to temper that, that's why the Hesder system was created as it was. So it is a real challenge for sure. For sure, it would be. I think, as the Rav says, it would help if we could be honest about this. But just one note, responding to what the Rav was talking about how this Rav Friedman mentioned that we're not a nation and we're a religious community. Has the Rav heard of the name Elmer Berger? Has that name ever?
I'm sorry. What was the name again?
Elmer Berger.
Elmer Berger?
Yeah.
No.
I'll send the Rav the Wikipedia page of this individual. He was a Reform rabbi in Cleveland in the early 1900s, a staunch anti-Zionist. And a little unknown fact about this individual, which I don't see in most public sources about this, he was the rabbinical consultant for Fatah. He was the rabbinical consultant for Arafat.
Now that you mentioned that, I do recall reading something about this person. Yes.
So I found it fascinating to read the ideology of this person because he was so explicit about this position, meaning it wasn't in the manner in which the Rav is discussing now, kind of like going, like beating around the bush, so to speak. He was very explicit that Jewish people are not a nation. We were never a nation. We have no nationalist aspirations. We are a religious community. The Zionist enterprise is a perversion from Judaism for that reason, because it's all nationalism. It was very, very explicit. And this idea, right, the PA platform, which makes explicit references to the Jews and how, right, the current Zionist project is a perversion from Judaism because it's a nationalist movement and the Jews are really a religious community. All of those ideas were given to them by this Elmer Berger. So it's
now that you mentioned, I do recall. I saw this someplace.
Fascinating. Right. If the listeners would like to see an example of this ideology mapped out fully, right, in its entirety, and it's an explicit entirety, I would urge them, because it's very insightful, because the contrast to a true Torah approach of what the Jewish people are, the Am HaNivchar, and all the trappings and all responsibilities and all the duties that come with being a nation, it's very, very insightful. I found it fascinating. So I would highly recommend looking into this. As disturbing as it is, I would highly recommend it.
I would just mention first of all, yes, thank you very much for that information. Now that you mentioned, I do recall reading about this somewhere, about this so-called Reform rabbi who provided the PLO with much material and much ammunition. But I had not recalled the name. I should point out something further, just by the way. There are those who will claim that yes, I mean, Hameth Miswa, all people are required to participate. No one's patur, no one is exempt. But right now, it's not a Hameth Miswa. They will tell you it's not a Hameth Miswa because the government's not religious, which is true, and they don't deal with anything correctly. Obviously, a government based on headed by and populated by people like Netanyahu and Gantz and and all manner of chilonim liberalim, right? Liberal, secular people. They may claim that they're nationalists, etc., but it seems there's an inbuilt and inexorable clash between nationalism and liberalism in its purest form. By definition, therefore, nothing can come of such a platform. That's the bug in the system in shall we say, in the Jabotinsky outlook. He was also a liberal, but when it comes down to it, all his students, including Menachem Begin, was completely off the derech, even when it came to nationalist matters, because of that liberal bug in the system. Anyhow, so to get back to the point, if some people say, well, it's not a country run by Torah, the government's not based on Torah, doesn't think properly, doesn't act properly, all that is true, no question. And therefore, it's not a Milchemet Miswa. Okay, so I saw an article written by, and I can send this to people, I printed it up and put it into Word format, and I can send people who are interested. Harav Yitzchak Shilat from Malay Adumim. He says that during Milchemet Yom HaKippurim, in which he fought as a Hesder soldier, he sent a question, something to do with Ilchot Mahaneh, something to do with certain Halakhic aspects of a military camp during wartime. He sent that question to whom? Who would you think? Who might you imagine he would send to? A Hesder fighting soldier who was out of, from Yeshiva. You think he might write to Rav Goren, or you might think he would write to the Rav Rashi at that time, who was, well, actually in Tafshin Lamed Gimel Dalet, it was Rav Goren, or the head of the Rav Rashi the Tzahal. He wrote to Harav Eliashiv, Hagaon Rabbeinu Yosef Shalom Eliashiv, Zichron Livracha. And this teshuvah that he wrote the question and the teshuvah that Rav Eliashiv wrote back to him appear in the Koves Teshuvot of Rav Eliashiv, Halak Aleph, Siman Resh Mem Gimel. And in that teshuvah, Rav Eliashiv writes to him, Wa'anan halo b'milchemet miswa ka'askenan. We are talking about a milchemet miswa. That was during Milchemet Yom HaKippurim. So the Haredi claim, or the claim that some people might make, that the definition of Milchemet Miswa does not apply, that also is spurious. The reason is entirely sociological and ideological and pragmatic, and not because the halakha dictates it, but despite what the halakha dictates. It's a hora'at sha'ah in a particular situation, which I understand very well, and that's why it's not possible to do anything at all. There's nothing can be done to bring about a situation in which Charedim, who are ideologically opposed to Giyus for the reasons that we mentioned, in other words, not coming into any kind of contact with the secular world, there is nothing you can do that will bring them into the army. It's not possible. They're quite literally willing to stand up against the wall and be shot at by a firing squad and not go to the army. And they don't just say this, they mean it. And on that, because they stand by what they believe and what they say, I respect them very much. Whether their arguments as they present them often are true or not true. But their willingness and ability to adopt a position and believe in something and be immovable on it, that is something that many of us could learn from. So perhaps at this point we'll round things up for today. Anyone else want to add something specific?
Thank you very much, Harav. Thank you very much for having me, and as
our pleasure. Your
insights as usual.
Your contributions were, as always, very important. So I thank you all. I thank you all. I wish all of us Chag Sameach, and may
I ask a question?
By all means.
I put a question in the chat when following a discussion about Mitman Mea as to why if you look in the chat, you'll see the question. Why would the Rambam say that the Mashiach, Afal Pisha Mitman Mea, even though he tarries, will still wait for him? It's usually translated as to tarry, Tarry. So the Rav was saying that verb implies that the reason the person is tarrying is due to some sort of shock. what shock would the Mashiach be suffering from that he's tarrying? That's my question.
All right. Well, I think I understand your question, and the answer I think is very simple. The first thing you need to know is that the Rambam did not write the text to which you refer.
Ah.
Everyone thinks the Rambam wrote that brief, those 13 principles or articles or foundations of Torah, belief, and faith, as they appear in the back of Tfilat Shaharit in the Sidur or something.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, the Rambam did not write that. No, I don't know who did write it, but I know it wasn't the Rambam. The reason I know this is because if you want to see what the Rambam did write, then you look up his Perush on the Mishnah, the end of Masechet Sanhedrin, and we have it all written, laid out before us. It's not in brief telegraphic form as it appears in Sidurim or what have you. It's not 1 line per or 1.5 lines per principle. It's paragraphs upon paragraphs per principle. The Rambam wrote exactly what he meant and very clearly. It was then somehow summarized by someone at some point as a kind of catechism for to know and to follow and to look at, to refer to, and that's fine, but it's not what the Rambam wrote. So Rambam is not responsible for the choice of words there. That's the first thing to know. The person who wrote that meant to say simply that, and the Rambam meant to say that Biyat HaMashiach, in other words, the return of Am Yisrael to its normative and nominal state of affairs and existence. In other words, living in, as Rambam describes at the beginning of Perek Yud Aleph, the 11th chapter of Ilchot Melachim or Milchamoth, as Rambam, and also in Perek Yud Bet in the 12th chapter, Rambam explains at length that the definition of Yemot HaMashiach is a time when the Jewish people return to their land and they are a sovereign national entity ruled by a Jewish government at a time when all the laws and precepts of the Torah will be activated and real and part of our national and individual existence. That is the definition of Yemot HaMashiach. If you see that this hasn't happened yet, says the Rambam, then no, this doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just means it hasn't happened yet. Why it hasn't happened yet, that's another discussion. But does it have something to do with our actions or lack thereof? Yes, I think it does. It has everything to do with that. But the fact that things do not take place or have not yet taken place, the Rambam says, don't imagine that means it's not going to, even though it's been a long time, do not imagine this will not happen. It will happen, and it must happen because it is an essential, fundamental tenet of Torah Judaism. That's what Rambam meant to say, and that's essentially what the person who summarized his words also meant to say.
Thank you. That clarifies a lot and just points out how ignorant I am of most of these texts. Thank you very much.
I will mention that most people assume that the Rambam wrote that very telegraphic version of what he wrote, and which appears in Sidurim. Most people assume the Rambam wrote that, and they simply are unaware of this fact. You're not alone. If you didn't know that, you're not alone. You shouldn't feel bad. Most people do not know this simple fact. If you want to read what the Rambam wrote, we have the text before us. He wrote it originally in Arabic. It's been translated, of course, into Lashon HaKodesh, going back already 800 odd years, and it's been translated a number of times. And you can read exactly what Rambam wrote, and you will see that the Rambam says it all depends on us. As Rambam, right, you look up again the 11th chapter of Yechot Melachim Milchamot at the very end of Mishneh Torah, and you will see how Rambam describes the process of. He says, "Im ya'amod melech." Let me just open this up for one moment, perhaps. All right, let me share the screen with you very briefly. Here you can see this is Perek Yud Aleph Yechot Melachim Milchamot Halakha Het Daled. Ve'im ya'amod melech mi Beth David. If a king arises, a king means someone who rules over the Jewish people. He follows the Torah. He lives according to the Torah. He wishes to follow and act in accordance with the Torah. And he will do what it takes, what is necessary for the Jewish people to walk in the path of the Torah, and will fight the Jewish people's enemies. Then we can begin to assume that this person is the Mashiach, the Melech HaMashiach referred to by the Nevi'im, because the Torah itself doesn't use that term. Now, everyone should ask themselves, but no one does, as a rule. What the Rambam says, Im ya'amod melech mibeth David, if such a king will arise. Okay. Question.
How
does a king arise?
exactly?
Does a king arise before there are people over whom you can rule? Or does the king first appear when there's no nation, no country, nothing to rule over, and somehow the country, the state, the kingdom takes form? No, obviously not. First you have first you need to have the critical mass of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, and then obviously naturally, intuitively, the people want to know, well, how are we going to rule ourselves? Who's going to rule? How's it going to be done? Etc. And somehow they nominate a king. Or you could use the word president. It doesn't matter right now. They nominate them for themselves a ruler. They appoint a ruler over the Jewish people. First, you have to have a critical mass of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. And they have to be in a situation where they are sovereign and independent and able to act in this fashion. And then they can appoint a leader over themselves. It doesn't work in the opposite direction. So first it depends on the Jewish people being in Eretz Yisrael and wanting such a thing. You first have to want such a thing. And then you can act upon that national will. Without the national will, things do not progress.
Right.
All right, we shall end here for today. It's been a pleasure speaking to you all. Yes, my pleasure. Thank you for your question. Kol tuv hizku v'yames levavchem kol hameyahalim ladunai. Be strong and of good faith and heart, and be certain that Hashem will deliver us from our enemies. Shalom v'nisahon.
Amen.
Shalom.
Yachad nenatzech. Thank you.
Kol tuv lachem.
Kol tuv.